All right, well, we can see some people filtering in, so we're going to start here with our virtual rosé tasting today. Um, for those of you who didn't join the last tasting, my name is Curtis Mann. I am a master of wine, head wine guy, head wine geek for Albertsons Companies. And today we're going to go through some virtual tasting of rosé. Here is the agenda of what we're doing. We're gonna go through some talk about the grape varietals. We're gonna talk about the rosé vineyard characteristics, winemaking techniques. Then we're gonna taste a bunch of wines, and then we're gonna open up things for questions. So anyway, if any of you are interested, I know we got a lot of questions last time of what a master of wine is. So a master of wine is somebody who's passed a number of exams. They spent, it took me 8 years to become a master of wine. And so I basically dedicated my life to wine, and I love teaching these type of events. And so I really look forward to us spending the next hour together tasting through some of these wines. All right, so before we get started, the wines we are tasting today are on this lineup here. And so hopefully you were able to get access to all of them. Really what we intended to do was to give you kind of a broad swath of what's out there in the market, what offers a really good price to value and can give you a different interpretation of styles of rosé. And so I think that, we've picked a good group here. Are these the only good rosés out there? Absolutely not. There are so many great rosés. And we might talk about a couple that we don't taste today. So I encourage you to kind of use this as a jumping off point. The second thing is that there were a couple that were hard to get in certain places. And, obviously, as a casualty of the pandemic, unfortunately, shipping wines around the world has gotten very complicated. And so we apologize if a couple were not available. Hopefully, most were available in most of your markets, but we know that there was some issue getting the Kim Crawford Rosé in a couple of places. So I sincerely apologize for that. I encourage you to take this, the knowledge you gain here, go out and explore some other wines if they didn't happen to be there, and then we'll make it up to you in the next tasting. All right, so the other thing too is that go ahead and open your wines now, because as I said last time, it's going to be a lot more interesting to listen to me after you've enjoyed a glass of wine. And I don't want this to turn into a lecture. This is, you're here to enjoy yourself, to learn more about wine in a fun atmosphere. And so feel free to open all of them, get your, an idea of what you feel like the wines should, or taste like kind of even before we discuss them. And that'll give you a good, understanding of where we're going today. Okay, all right, so I think we're ready here. So what is rosé? Rosé is actually a style of wine. So most of the time we're talking about things like, Cabernet, or we may be talking about a region, but here we're actually talking about how a wine is made. And that's really defines the wine itself. And it's typically a red. It's essentially a red wine that's made like a white wine. So it's made from red grape varietals. And so that creates a unique style, definitely, different than most other wines out there. And so, rosé itself recently has definitely picked up in popularity. So from 2010 to 2020, there was a tremendous increase in rosé sales. So it's a style of wine that was kind of a sleeper, and then over the last decade, it's taken off. And really, it's always been a big deal in France, but that's kind of continued to spread across to other countries and even domestic here in the United States. And I do think that it's only the tip of the iceberg of rosé, because if you think how fast it's growing right now, it's only 4% of all sales in the United States, but in countries like France, it's 20%. I mean, it holds a big share in Italy. So there's a tremendous opportunity for this category to get bigger. And we're seeing it here. We have a lot of new rosés coming into the market. So we have already over 1,500 already in the U.S. retail, and there's more and more coming. So exciting category to be in right now, an exciting category to taste. So, the question is what drives the taste of rosé? Why does rosé taste like it does? And there's really three things here, right? There's the grape varietal, the vineyard location, and then how the wine is made. So we're going to talk about all three of those things. We're not going to spend a deep, detailed class. I'm not going to. You're not going to be able to pass, advanced viticulture or enology class after this, but at least it gives you a perspective of what is going on within the rosé category, and give you a little bit of background as to, okay, this is why this is this way or not. The first thing is, and I kind of talked about this earlier, but rosé is very unique because it can be made from almost any grape varietal. So that's red, that can give the wine a red color. So there are, some key grape varietals that are used, and those grape varietals definitely influence the way that rosé tastes. So the most common one is Grenache. And the reason that Grenache is the most common is because it's a thin-skinned grape varietal. And so it can provide the strawberry and the watermelon color and whatnot, but it doesn't tend to be bold and tannic. So when you go to make rosé, you can make a delicate wine out of that red grape varietal. But it's not the only grape varietal, and there are other grape varietals like Syrah, Mourvedre, Cinsault. In the New World, you see a lot more Pinot Noir being used, Tempranillo in Spain and also in California. And then Zinfandel, which is the classic rosé. Obviously, if you think back in the day, what was the original popular rosé? Well, white Zinfandel. Definitely for us Americans, Zinfandel was kind of the first rosé for us. But it's also being used more and more for quality rosé production in the New World. And then the final thing is that we talked about it's a red wine. It's made from red grapes, but it's made like a white wine. But there are some times when white wines sneak into the rosé, and so we'll talk about Rolle. It's a very important grape varietal in the production of rosé, especially in Provence. So it's not all reds. And the question sometimes comes up, well, do reds and whites get blended together? Theoretically, in France, it's illegal to blend red and white wines together to make a rosé. But the exception is that if you pick the grapes at the same time and you throw them into the same vat, then it's considered a red wine. So that's how a white wine makes it into a red wine production in France, even though it's not technically legal. And then, of course, you're going to see there's actually a couple wines. One wine we're going to taste today, which is us. The great thing about being here in the United States is so we don't have a lot of the rules, so we can blend whites into reds to make a rosé with some interesting flavors to it. So there are some pretty key characteristics to rosé production, and I'm saying what is ideal. And so, nothing's ever perfect, right? When you go to make wine, it's an art and a science, and a lot of that art has dealing with the fact that it's really hard to get the perfect vintage, the perfect vineyard. You're always, dealing with some other issue or whatever. But these are kind of the ideal or the most ideal that you can get. So you want a vineyard that's warm, but not too warm, but not too cold, right? So it's right in the middle. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have some cold producing regions. We have some very warm producing regions. If it's too cold, then you get a wine that's really, acidic and biting, and then the fruit flavors aren't ripe enough. But if it's too warm, there's too much alcohol in the wine, and then rosé is not delicate anymore. Soil is important because, especially for something like a Grenache, you need a well-draining soil. Otherwise, you get these flabby wines, and then you don't get the acidity in the rosé that creates that freshness that everyone likes to drink on a warm summer day. And the other thing that is ideal, not always executed, because obviously practicality, this is not always an option, but really the thing to do and the best production rosé is to designate a vineyard for production of rosé. So it's not like when you're picking a Grenache or a Pinot Noir, you're not just saying, okay, I have a Pinot Noir here, and I'm going to take half this vineyard and make it into this beautiful Pinot Noir from Carneros, and I'm going to take the other half and make it a rosé. Well, I'm going to designate this part of the vineyard because I need to pick this part of the vineyard much earlier to make the rosé, and this part of the vineyard is going to go into the Pinot Noir. So it's more complicated than just saying, okay, I'm just going to take a red wine and make it, and just make it like a white wine. You really need to think about, okay, how ripe is that wine going to get, and how do I dedicate the right right vineyard blocks. And so a lot of tricks I've seen of this one's, and it's actually pretty useful. There's a great producer in Napa called Starmont, where they had a vineyard that wasn't necessarily ripening their Pinot Noir as much as they wanted. So they made a beautiful rosé out of it, because the wines never got really ripe enough to make this dense, California Pinot, but it was perfect for Pinot Noir rosé. And then, of course, last thing, which is ideal for almost every wine. So I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have put this in here, but vinification close to the vineyard site is important. But I think it's especially important in rosé because you're trying to make a delicate, beautiful wine. And, if you're trucking wine, 5 hours across, California or France or whatever, inevitably that wine starts to, ferment on its own or crush itself under its own, weight and things like that. So the closer you can get, the better you are. I mean, the vineyard that I'm in right now, as you can see around me, is actually one of the wines we're going to taste. It's Parasol. It is, all these beautiful vineyard sites are right on the winemaking property, so ideal for the production of rosé. So I mentioned that not too cold, not too hot situation. So this is exactly that. We have the classical rosé production areas, and I picked the classical ones because you can pretty much make rosé anywhere, right? As we were talking about, but these are the areas in the world that have become famous for rosé. And, the most famous is Provence, and we're going to taste a couple of those today. And there's some other ones like Sancerre and Touraine, and then parts of northern Italy. Rioja/Navarre is really well known for rosé. Chocolat, the Languedoc's making some beautiful wines, Côte d'Aron, and then Tavel. But they all kind of sit in this 44 to 41 degrees latitude, right? That they're in that sweet spot of not too cold, not too warm, with the exception of Touraine and Sancerre, which kind of, Loire is quite a cold region, but sometimes they just make rosé because they can't make anything else. Like the wines just don't get ripe enough. So, really the majority and the kind of the best producing regions sit in this basically, band of 41 to 44. And again, there's exceptions to the rule. And if you think about New Zealand and other places around the world, that might not be the case. But where you think the origin of rosé comes from, this is really what drives that. The other thing, too, is that each one of these classical regions tends to have a little bit of a different characteristic. So, the grape varietals themselves drive a lot of the flavors, but Provence, you tend to get a really nice herbal character out of the wine. Rioja, there's allspice and white pepper, and so there's a uniqueness to some of these areas, and some of it has to do with the grape varietals grown, but also where they're grown. And it's really interesting to see, even within Provence, between Aix-en-Provence and the Côte de Provence and Bandol, the wines will pick up that kind of secondary mineral characteristic, which are typically seen more, thought of more like in Chardonnay or maybe a Pinot Noir or, a Côte d'Aron style like a GSM blend. But it does show up in rosé also. Okay, so we talked about the grapes and we talked about the regions, and now we're going to talk about the winery. So we're going to talk about, this is a beautiful shot from a Provence vineyard, winemaking facility, clean as a whistle, beautiful inside. You could eat up the floors if you wanted. But here's what I kind of put together for everybody is well, actually what I did was I took this off the Provence website, and I apologize. It is super hard to find wine maps or wine flow charts for winemaking. So this is the best one I can find, and it's a little dense. So just follow with me, really. It's really the point of rosé is it's very similar to white winemaking with a couple of key differences. And so I'm just going to highlight the differences. So the first real option is you bring the grapes into the winery. There's kind of a combination of red and white if you're going to make that style, if you're going to put Vermentino in it. And then you have to make a choice after you destem, or you could whole cluster if you wanted to. And that choice is whether you're going to direct press, which means you're going to put the grapes in a bin, and then you're going to press the grapes out like a white wine, or whether you are going to actually keep, when you press the grapes, you're going to keep them on the skin. So you either have the choice of taking them off the skins right away or keeping them on the skins. And then however long you keep them on the skins, will determine how dark the rosé is. And so a lot of wineries that make these beautiful, very light colored rosés that we're going to taste today, the direct press is very low, more common, right? Very, very low skin contact. But there are some that have more of this maceration. And then on top of the maceration, there's also this process called saignée, where you almost basically, what you do is you make a red wine and then you bleed off the rest of the juice. So these tend to be even darker in color. And so the saignée method is typically used a lot in the New World, where you're making another wine, like you're making in Zinfandel. In fact, that's how white Zinfandel was created, right? They were making Zinfandel and they needed to bleed off some juice so that they could make the Zinfandel more dense. And then they had this rosé, and they're like, well, we should make a sweet wine out of this, and that's how that became. But more and more producers are doing that for dry wines too. The one challenge there is that saignée, the wines tend to have more body and depth, and sometimes tannins sneak into the wines, and so that can be a little bit challenging. I think the wine we're going to taste today that's got some saignée in it actually did a great job managing that. So the interesting part to that. And then really the second part of this winemaking process is the alcoholic fermentation, which is pretty common. So you would think, just like a white wine, you're going to do a cooler fermentation. You're not going to want to make this too hot of a fermentation, because then you could extract too much flavor. But the one thing that you can see the difference in is that there are some wineries that send the wines through a malolactic fermentation. There's some that decide not to. So if you remember from maybe our last event, malolactic fermentation is the secondary fermentation that kind of creates that buttery creaminess in Chardonnay. And so a lot of wineries prevent this from happening inside of rosé, because they don't want a wine that's going to be really, creamy and mouthfilling. And then the final thing is how long do you age the wine for? So, could you, some places in France, for example, Bandol requires that you age the wine for 9 months. And in some cases, some people are getting really fancy with rosé and aging it in oak. If they feel like they have a really serious wine, the upscale versions of Whispering Angel, some of them are aged in oak, but most of them are aged in tank for a short period of time to retain their freshness. And then they go to bottle. And then, the kind of final piece to all of this is color and tannins to some extent. So there's a lot of debate about color in rosé, and a lot of folks, let's say here in the United States, it's a little challenging to sell the wine on the right, or, well, I suppose it would be your left, but the darker Tavel, right? And the Parasol, which we're tasting today, is this beautiful light salmon color. There's actually no reason that either one of these is better than the other, right? They're just different. And the Tavel wines have a complexity and aromatic depth that are really interesting, and they tend to be a little bit more full-bodied than the Parasol wines, for example, the Côte de Provence. But that style is an interesting style, and we look to educate everybody so they know, hey, it's not bad because it's dark, right? The one exception would be you don't want this color. So I didn't throw any wines out of the bus specifically. There's a couple out there maybe on our shelves. But if you see an orangish kind of brownish color, that means that rosé has gone over the hill. And hopefully they're not on our shelves. But in case you see that, you can thumbs down it. So hopefully that's not a lot out there. But just when you're looking for rosé, that's kind of the markers you can look for. And the question comes up sometimes, does it need to be current vintage, or could it be a couple of years older? We're going to taste some wines today, and a couple of these I think you want to drink right away, and then there's a couple of the acidity is just racing, and it could age for a while, and it still might be really nice. A couple years so. Okay. So kind of to wrap up before the tasting, because I know everyone wants to get tasting and probably wants to stop hearing me talk about winemaking techniques, even though I love it because I'm a wine geek. But basically, rosé, as we talked about, it's made from red grapes, but it's usually made like a white wine. It's all the pieces that we talked about are important, and the colors can vary. So I put together this rosé wine wheel just to kind of give you an idea of all the different flavors that come from different areas, and all the different things that if you were in a if you went to a party and brought a rosé and you said something, then it would make you sound like you knew what you're talking about. So, you know, a good grouping of complexity of items, you know, fruity, floral, herbal, and then some winemaking characteristics sometimes where, you know, you see, you know, some different pieces that might affect the rosé. But rosé, you know, really is affected by mainly the grape varietal and the region it's grown in. So you're pretty safe, you know, kind of sticking to these. And you know, and we'll see. We'll talk about the wines today and see how they fit within this wheel. Okay, and on to the wines. So we have some wines to taste. Okay, so the first wine we are going to taste is the Boda Box California Rosé. And I know some folks probably thought, oh my gosh, we're doing a virtual tasting with box wine. Like, what is this guy's bonkers? But I'd have to say there's a couple of things that box wine has huge advantage in rosé production versus bottle. First thing is that it is in a box, so there's no light getting into the rosé, which is great. It protects the wine. And the second thing is, like in the case of this, is 3 liters, so it's actually going to keep the wine fresher for longer. So, you know, that's a great kind of aspect to this. So I'm going to pour myself some of this without trying to spill it all over me. You know, and this is the wine that we're tasting today that's made in that Saunier method. And what it is a blend of, you know, a number of different grape varietals like Barbera and Zinfandel, and then some whites like French Colombard and Chenin that add the acidity to the wine. And then, you know, you get a little bit of structure from, and actually floral characteristics from the Viognier. So I just think this is one of the best, you know, if you think price to value for domestic rosés out there, you know, this is one of the best out there. And I really think that their descriptor is right. I mean, the cranberry is very, very forward in this wine. And then that stone fruit characteristic kind of almost punches at the end from the Viognier. So an interesting characteristic on that wine. And again, you get a lot for 3 liters. You get 4 bottles of wine. Not that I'm the marketing manager for Boda Box, but you know, if I want to drink rosé and I want to drink domestic rosé, this is a nice one, and just put it in the refrigerator, and then you can have it for the whole week. So, so again, a really nice wine, really well made, and what they've done, you know, so a lot of times the Saunier wines will have, you know, a really tactile feel to the palate, but they've done a good job with filtration and finding and making this wine very delicate and easy to drink. And you're going to see as we go through, it's a little bit more forward aromatically. And I think that's kind of a theme of, you know, domestic rosé from the United States, but still really well done on the flavor on that. All right. The next wine is the Kim Crawford Rosé. So what I wanted to do is kind of give you 2 what we call New World examples. So New World is, you know, basically everywhere except for Europe. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see 2 different kind of aspects of the wine. You know, these wines tend to be a little bit more fruit forward, just kind of almost like our style of wine that we make here in the United States. And so this is the Kim Crawford Rosé. New Zealand is a great place to make rosé because it is very cold in New Zealand. I mean, it's very cold, should I say, from an aromatic perspective, but they do get a lot of sunlight. So the wines do ripen, but the acidity stays. So it's perfect for rosé, right? And this is a good example of that. The wines themselves. So Kim Crawford has a proprietary blend apparently, and they're not going to tell us what's in here, but you know, it's most likely it's a blend from Hawke's Bay and Marlborough. So to me, that suggests that there's, you know, some wines in Hawke's Bay, which is more Bordeaux based, interestingly enough. So probably some Merlot and some other Cabernet and Syrah, and then you know, Marlborough based with some Pinot Noir. So you know, a really nice little wine. Again, it's got that, you know, kind of watermelon-y characteristic to it with the strawberries. And I'd say it also has an earthiness, which is kind of nice. It's a balance against, the fresh fruity character. That earthiness sometimes people think of as a negative. But in my mind, in a lot of cases, it helps keep the wine interesting and complex and fun and friendly. So, it balances out that like really aggressive fruit character. And it tastes really nice from that perspective. And definitely it's because, New Zealand's cold. So you're going to get a little bit of earthiness out of your wines pretty much no matter what you do. And it almost smells like, I doubt they blended Sauvignon Blanc, but there's just almost that hint of flinty kind of Sauvignon Blanc in this wine. And maybe that's just because I associate New Zealand with so much of a Sauvignon Blanc, but really nice little wine. Okay. All right. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on. The next place we're going to go to France. And so this is southern France. And we picked this wine. It's one of my favorite wines. It's probably one of my favorite wines we sell in all the store. And the reason that is because you just can't get a better price for a wine. It's under $10. It's the La Ville Ferme. And so this wine is made by the folks that make Beaucastel. So it's the same family. And they're very unique in that they produce some really beautiful value wines, not just this rosé. They make some reds too, and a white. But they also make $250 bottles of wine. So they're kind of one of those winemaking families that's figured out how to make very high-end wines and at the same time make value-oriented wines so that people can understand and come into the category and enjoy wines and not lose the shirt off their back. So they make a couple of other wines. They make the Miraval wine, so they know how to make rosé. But I find this is just a great wine for the price. It's very delicate for what it is, and it's mainly Cinsault with some Grenache and Syrah in it. And they do a lot of direct press. So they for a wine at this price, it's pretty unusual for them to go through the whole process to really direct press this, use a pneumatic press, make very little skin contact. So they make this wine, even though it's under $10, like they make their high-end, rosé. So again, it's kind of like that. This is the entry-level rosé from the old world, but it really bats above its price. So I mean, it's got that, again, that kind of like they say cherry sorbet. I don't know. I don't know what the difference between cherry and cherry sorbet is, but it's got definitely a nice red fruit, a little bit of the kind of like that freshness of fresh strawberries and fresh cherries. Maybe that's what they're referring to as in the sorbet. And it does have just a hint of the Rhone. So this wine is actually, interestingly enough, Vin de France. So it's not from any one region in France. It's from all of France. But I got some inside knowledge. It's actually made from Ventoux, and they put Vin de France because if they need to go other places to make rosé, they want that flexibility. So Ventoux is actually right in the Côte de Rhône. It's appellation essentially. It's right outside of it, and you can see it on that little marker there. And it's pretty close to the Mediterranean, and it's a beautiful area. And there's the hill of Ventoux. I think it's the one that they ride there, that folks ride their the bikes up in the Tour de France. So beautiful area, make some great wines, and I think this is a good example of that. I'm looking through the questions here real quick, so sometimes they only pop up for a second. Let me see. Okay, so I see that the Kim Crawford has a little bit of effervescence. Yeah, so that one is basically what happens is they add a little bit of effervescence to the wine so that they add it so that it lifts the flavors and it feels a little bit lighter on the palate. So you want that refreshing characteristic. And sometimes with the wine, is maybe not acidic enough, you can add a touch of CO2 to kind of lift the wine. So that's where you see that. I saw that if you're doing a wine tasting with friends, should we start with rosé, then white, and then finish with red? You know, you can do whatever you want. It's funny because when you go to Europe, they always start with the reds, and then you do the whites, and then you finish with rosé, which is strange. But it's definitely an opportunity for you to experiment. I think that, you know, what I like to do is typically acidic whites work a little bit better with cheese. And so if you have like a charcuterie board that has a lot of cheese in it, you can use an acidic white like a Sauvignon Blanc or you can use a, you know, like a Burgundy or something, or a bright Chardonnay to start. And then, you know, rosé is a great wine with like a light salad. You know, so you can kind of go from basically white to rosé to then if you're making, you know, meat dish, then, you know, heavy, if it's, I don't know, steak based or something, you could obviously move to red. So you have that option on a lot of these. And then we had what do you call the style of glass recommended for rosé? So so I don't know if you're referring to my glass. My glass is a Schatzwiesel. It's a Sauvignon Blanc glass, but this style, the glass that these rosés are in, is the Burgundy glass. So I'm not sure if that was the question, but you know, that's hopefully that answers whatever that question was. Yes, my glass, we think. So my glass is, yeah, so it's a Schatzwiesel Sauvignon Blanc glass. And so I would say that with your Schatzwiesel glass, the reason I picked the Schatzwiesel Sauvignon Blanc for this tasting is that rosé tends to be really delicate, and the Sauvignon Blanc glass emphasizes some of the flavors, and so I can taste the wines a little bit better. Any one of these glasses that has this kind of aggressive, you know, kind of curvature upwards, and then a smaller opening at the top is really good for rosé. Again, like actually I drink champagne out of these glasses too, because anything that's super delicate, you know, this could give you a little bit more emphasis in the flavors, and you can kind of follow the wines a little bit more and pick out some of the flavors if you want. But you're also welcome to, I mean, the Riedel Overture glasses are great glasses. They're just everyday glasses. They work fine. All right, so we're going to go on to the next wine, and I'll answer some questions as they come in. So the last two wines that we have are from Provence, and so these are the classics. You know, these are the you know, the wines of the world that kind of made rosé famous. And so Provence sits on the Mediterranean Sea, you know, east of Marseille, and you know, in between basically Marseille and Nice. And a lot of the vineyard sites are on the they're basically on the ocean, and then as you go in, there's some valley floor, and then when you get to that kind of lightish purple color, that's where you start to get into the hillsides, and that's when the really good rosé is from the Côte de Provence. There's some other rosé that we're not going to taste today that's really beautiful from kind of that it's hard to say what that color is. It's like a pinkish color. But you know, Bandol makes some beautiful rosés. There's a wine that's, you know, more towards Aix-en-Provence, and that's, you know, is actually the Aix-en-Provence appellation, and those wines tend to be a little bit more forward in fruit than Provence. So Provence is known for its elegance and its beauty, and especially these wines that kind of sit on this hillside here. Yeah, so there was a question on, let's see, so how chilled should a rosé be before serving? And so I would say that's a good, you want to serve it like a white wine, right? So 45 degrees or so, not all the way down like these wines. So we're going to taste, this next wine we're going to taste is the Whispering Angel, and I'll give you an example of what we did with it. This Cauves d'Esclans Whispering Angel, for me, it's about 45 degrees right now. You know, pulled it out of the little Yeti cooler I have, and it's you know, got a really nice you know, aromatic character. Comes out enough so you can smell what's in the wine. You can get, you know, the red fruits and a little bit of the, you know, the dark fruits, and then a touch of the that herbal characteristic that I mentioned in Provence, and that's really kind of there.
as the wine gets too warm, then it's not as enjoyable, right? You're trying to, rosé is meant to be refreshing. So it gets up to 50, 55 degrees, then you start to notice the alcohol a little bit more. So I would say this is a good place to go, is right at this price, right at this temperature level. And so this wine, obviously, the Whispering Angel is one of the most famous rosés. It's kind of helped restart the rosé craze. Sacha Lachine and his team, really went to the Provence and decided, hey, we're going to make some amazing wines at Chateau Escalon, and we're going to, send this into the United States, and and of course the marketing is beautiful, but the wine itself is also really well done. And so this wine is the one that I was talking about that has some white grapes in it. So it has Vermentino, so it has roll. So it's Grenache and then, they plant Vermentino in a similar area and then they co-ferment it. And so you get it's not a lot. I think it was about 10%. But what the roll does is it definitely, it adds a little bit of weight on the body, and then it also adds some acidity. So this wine, when you taste it, there's a good amount of freshness and acidity to this wine. And the other thing that I've learned from some winemakers in Provence, and then a couple here in California, is that the roll helps. It reduces the pH level, and that also helps the wine age better. So there's some producers, that they're using roll, and then they find that their wines age a lot better. So this is a good example of that here. With this wine. So we had somebody ask, what are lees? So that's a great question, because I didn't kind of explain that. I guess I was thinking too much over the last one of these. Lees are basically the dead yeast cells, and they can add some depth to the palate. And so they're being utilized more and more in rosé to kind of, fill out the rosé. And the question about rosés are primarily dry. So today, if you've tasted all these wines, and we'll taste one last wine here, all of these wines are dry, right? The Boda Box Rosé probably has a tiny bit of residual sugar in it to kind of cover up the tannins a little bit, but it wasn't noticeable. So it's got to be under 7 or 8 grams per liter. So it's essentially dry. All of the wines now, I mean, there are some rosés that are sweet out there, but most of the popular wines these days are dry rosé. Okay, so that's what we have there on the Whispering Angel. Hopefully everyone enjoyed that. When we do this in person one day, I'll be able to get some direct feedback instead of just answering my own questions on the computer screen. But thank you. You guys are asking some great questions here. All right, and then the last wine that we have to taste today is the Parasol Reserve de Templier Côte de Provence Rosé. So what happened here on this wine, and one of the reasons we wanted to taste this, was that it is essentially a wine that we've gotten exclusive here at all of our stores. And what we did was we worked with the winery, and they created a special blend for us. Because Parasol Commandery is known for making some absolutely fabulous rosés that sell for $50 or $60 a bottle. And we thought, well, can we get that same, quality winemaking, but not for $50. So we were able to get this beautiful wine from them. And this Reserve de Templier is a reference to the Knights of Templar, which is basically the Knights founded this area in I think it was in the 1200s and the 1300s, and they were actually the first ones to grow grapes in this area. And so this is a reference to them. And Parasol is a very famous producer of rosé. They have the crest, the Knights of Templar crest. They also have they use that symbol on a lot of their wines, the cross on a lot of their wines. So very famous winery, and we were really lucky to get a lot of this. And what we asked them to do is make the wine a little bit more approachable, because some of these wines are really geeky and they can be very acidic. But this one I think is a pretty wine. It's very elegant. It has those beautiful light red fruits. And the thing that I always thought was really, really amazing with this wine when we tasted it is the finish is super long. And it finishes
with a minerality, like almost a tactile feel to it, almost like a wet stones in a stream or something along those lines. And so it really has a beautiful kind of forward aromatic characteristic, still somewhat delicate, but then it finishes off with this beautiful mineral finish to it. And it has those herbs de Provence in there, just as a hint to say, hey, this is from Provence, but I'm super elegant and classy and all those things that Provence stands for. All right, so there's been some good questions here. Yeah, so how long is a bottle of rosé good for if it's open a few days? I'd say it's most rosé, as long as you keep it nice and cold in your refrigerator, you're good for 2 to 3 days. If you leave it open longer than that, you start to lose some of the aromatic complexity to the wine. And so I would say that's good, except for the Bota box, of course, because it's already in a box. It's in a contained atmosphere, so you're good on that one. You can keep that one for probably a couple weeks and be fine with it. Then there was a question about, I didn't use a very specific term. I said aging better. So I would say that what is aging? What are the references age time for rosé? So I would say for most domestic rosé, you want to drink the current vintage. So if it's 2020, you're going to want to drink 2020 up through probably the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. If you taste it, so some of these wines like the Whispering Angel, the Parasol, if you got that brightness and acidity and a density and a complexity of the wine, those will definitely go 2 to 3 to 4 years. The best thing though is that I think that the rosé really peaks at 2 to 3 years, and then I don't know if you have some of these really high end, like the high end Minuti wine or the Chateau d'Esclans that are made more like white wines, those wines will probably go 10-15 years, but in most cases you're not going to get a lot of extra benefit out of aging rosé. So I would just drink as close to current vintage as you could. There was a question about the Pacific Northwest, about how what's a good rosé up there. Yes, we didn't taste any today, but I know Adelsheim makes a beautiful rosé. Willamette Valley Vineyard makes a really nice wine. So there's the Oregon producers making some really good quality rosé based on Pinot. And so that's a good an option. And then in Washington, there are some small rosé producers, but I'd say that we haven't developed a Washington like rosé. There's a couple. There's a Charles Smith makes a rosé that's pretty good, but a lot like the Bota box, more forward. So if you're looking for that style, that's a good one. Okay. If you were going to travel to a location specifically to drink rosé, where would you go? Okay, so I would go to Provence. I think it's a great place to go. It's a beautiful place to visit. There's a lot of great hotels, and you can stay in like Aix-en-Provence, which is a city that has a college, just basically a college town, and the food is absolutely stunning there. So that one is beautiful. You can also, Rioja is a beautiful place to visit, and there's a lot of great rosé in Rioja, Navarra. More and more you're seeing, because of a little bit of climate change, Sancerre is producing more and more rosé, and that is also a fascinating place to visit. Okay. So any other questions here? Let's see. I'm just looking through this. If we were, yeah, we have a couple comments like Whispering Angel is my favorite. We got those questions of yeah, so I think we answered all of the questions here. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. just seeing if there was anything else out here. There's a question, is it possible to copy of the slideshow? So the slideshow, so right now there's some information in it that, you know, it's hard for me to publish out. Some of it is my own personal information, but we will publish the video of this. So you can videotape it or you can watch it and just don't tell anybody you took a screenshot, and then you can see, you know, so because hopefully you can take this information and reshare it. You know, we put it back on the Albertsons YouTube page, and so you can take a look at it. So anyway, I guess with that, I don't see any more questions. And somebody asked me, why was I not slurping with air? That's a good question. So sometimes people do that. They slurp with air to get more effervescence out of wine. I never was great at it. I just taste the wine and drink it, and then I found that worked for me. But you can do it that way. That can, if you bring air into your, you know, into the wine, into your mouth as you're tasting the wine, you can really enhance the flavors. But I kind of prefer to just stick with what I'm doing because, like I said, I have a hard enough time drinking the wine as it is. And then the one last question I'll answer, and then we'll let everybody go and we'll do some thanks. But is what is your take on Australian rosé wine? So there's some really great ones out there. Yalumba is one of my favorite. They make some beautiful rosé. And there's some smaller producers from the Yarra Valley who make some Pinot Noir rosé. It's great. So there's some outstanding Australian wines on the rosé front. And actually, you know, I think we don't have it in a lot of places anymore, but the Yellowtail Rosé used to be one that was quite a great value, kind of like the La Vielle Ferme. So, you know, they make a variety from, you know, inexpensive to you know, top-notch rosé, but there's definitely some great Australian rosés out there. Okay. I think all the rest of these are, you know, it's great. Are you doing more of these? So I'll follow up. The last question is, are you doing more of these? So yes. So the next one we're going to do is on October 14th. It's going to be Pinot Noir. So same time, we're going to talk about Pinot Noirs from around the world, and we're going to talk about what makes Pinot Noir special. And so you're definitely welcome to sign up for that. Look for the email that comes out, and we'll also, you know, go ahead and you know, send out the link. So if you've signed up for this one, hopefully we can, you know, you'll look for the next ones come through, and we'll, you know, continue this. We're going to do about once every, you know, month to month and a half. We're going to do one of these. So, okay. All right. Well, you know, I'm going to go ahead and just close. You know, basically here's some here's some websites if you're interested about, you know, the different types of wines that we tasted today, and the different types of, you know, learning materials. Essentially, if you're interested in becoming a Master of Wine, I would suggest going to the masterofwine.org website. And then, you know, there's some great helpful links here for our website if you're interested in purchasing these wines online. For all the great banners, you know, thank you to Randall's, Tom Thumb, Acme, Jewel Osco, United, Albertsons, Safeway. You guys did a great job participating, and I hope everyone enjoyed. Great, and that will wrap it up.